That's good. Let me know if you can't hear me because I have a fairly quiet voice. So ask me to speak up. My story, the story that you're going to hear today about tomorrow makers, actually begins about in the year 2001 when I decided that I had enough of pure corporate work and that I wanted to begin bringing all the different disciplines together and provide an opportunity for the community to be able to afford us and to be able to work with us. So I started Tomorrow Makers. The name came just out of, it's like Tomorrow Makers. And it's like, that's it. That's it. Didn't fuss about what name should I call it. In my mind, Tomorrow Makers meant all of us creating a better world. We're making the future by design, not default. That's one of our axioms. And so I saw Tomorrow Makers primarily in 2001 as our network, but not exclusively our network. And then things happened, and Todd was my partner in this, along with a few other people. And our main work became transferred to the World Economic Forum in 2003, 4, 5. And so we did that, and then I got sick. Todd started having babies, and Tomorrow Makers said, well, I guess I'll wait one. And so it's been dormant until about 3 years ago. And it's like, okay, what are you about? What are you about? What are you about? And it's like, I want to just bring process people together. Tomorrow Makers is about products, it's about services, it's about small businesses, it's about large, it's about communities. It's all of us who are waking up to the fact that we people, can design the future. We can take charge now. And so I started thinking, how would this happen? And I got close. And things would fall through. And so if you were in a CLMR, you heard me talking about it's coming. And if you were in Netherlands last year, you heard me saying, it's coming, we're getting close. And now I just want to say that on the solution box in the modeling language, we, Tomorrow Makers, and I'll introduce you to that in just a moment. On a vantage point, we're at the philosophical, cultural, policy level, moving back and forth and back and forth. At the design formation, we're approaching the program level of what we're going to do. And at the creative process, we're definitely at intention. And as you remember, intention comes before you know how to do it, okay? Because if you didn't have that intensity, if you didn't have that energy, that frustration, I've got to figure this out, you'd just go on to something else. So that intention is what pushes it through. So that's what I want to say. So do we know exactly how this is going to happen? Not a chance. Do we know what it's going to cost? Not a chance. These are not the questions to be asking today, because we're not nearly there. But I just thought it was interesting to kind of point out where we are. The second thing that has always interested me is this quote. Freeman Dyson expressed some thoughts on craziness. In a Scientific American article called Innovation in Physics, he began by quoting Niels Bohr. Bohr had been in attendance at a lecture in which Wolfgang Pauli proposed a new theory of elementary particles. Pauli came under heavy criticism, which Bohr summed up for him. We are all agreed that your idea is crazy. The question which divides us is whether it's crazy enough to be true. To that, Freeman added, when a great innovation appears, it will almost certainly be in a muddled, incomplete, and confusing form. To the discoverer herself, it will be only half understood. To everyone else, it will be a mystery. For any speculation which does not at first glance look crazy, there is no hope. And so, I've been playing with that idea year after year after year after year. What does this actually mean? What is crazy enough? And I'm realizing that now is a cycle, a window, having lived through several cycles, that today, indeed, our paradigm is changing, and changing rapidly right now. And that on one side, it's impossible to do. Now, people aren't saying it's crazy anymore. We're beginning to say, oh, this is interesting, instead of that's crazy. And so when I did the learning exchange back in 1970, 100% of the people I talked to said, it's crazy, and it won't work. And when Matt and I were invited to do the World Economic Forum, we had all of our friends and colleagues and clients come in and do a dummy workshop with us. Except for one, 99% said it won't work. We had been there, we know it won't work. And so we tested a little bit, modified it a little bit, and it worked. And so, I'm used to being in the environment where being told things won't work. And you have to pay close attention to that. But that shouldn't stop us from doing it. So now, in March of this year, I was reading every Sunday morning. My reading is heuristic, to just go in search of something. And an interesting article leads me to something else, leads me to something else, leads me to something else. So that's my Sunday morning, in terms of just kind of going, what's going on in the world today? And I'm used to looking at the good news, not the bad news. I ignore the bad news as much as I can and invest in what's giving shape. So I ran across a paper called the 2030 Project. And I thought, the future, I'm always interested in the future. I'm going to read this article. And the more I got into it, the more I thought, wow, I want to take part in this. And this paper was written from a tech point of view, and a blockchain and a new internet weaving story, saying the internet was designed by very few people. We, the next generation, have to design all together. Because if we're not in the game, we can't really take part. And so he was saying, blockchain, hack people, can't do it without the social activists. And the social activists can't do it without the alternative currencies and the different ways of looking at value and how we gain, how we circulate currency throughout a system to create a better future. So I called him up and I said, Michael, I really want to be a part of this. He's South African. And we started conversations twice a week, maybe for an hour, but just finding out how much we had in common and how hungry we were. And then we found another person, and so my point to Michael, which is he's done incredible work, research, studied 200 or more blockchain papers, delving into them, comparing them, calling people, interviewing them, finding out what's happening. And so I said, but where's Gaia? And you want to do all of this, but where's Gaia? And it's like, oh, yeah. So we started, talking about Gaia, and then I found Elizabeth Sahtouris, who is a name that maybe some of you know, but she's a scientist and a biologist, and been around the world helping many, many small developing products and services come into being from a biological point of view. She's got something called ecosophy, which is, and her view is, as it used to be, economy came out of household, that, the well-being of the household ecosystem, and economy within that rather than the economy being everything. And environment has little tiny bits to do with that. So we're changing that all around. And so so then we started talking about how can we do this? How can we do this? And all three different vantage points. Mine is facilitation, group genius. Michael's is blockchain, technology. Elizabeth's is definitely Gaia. She studied with Lovelock and Margolin and others. And so, and then I read an article about how slime mold. How many of you have heard of slime mold? No slime mold? The slime mold is now a scholar at Hamilton College on the East Coast, I think in Maine. And they invited slime mold to be invited as a scholar because slime mold could answer so many questions better than we could about how to find the adjacent possibles, mostly for them, food. But, and so our project is called Project 2030, from a human organizing system that serves the 1% to an emergent global coordination inspired by slime mold and other intelligence of nature. And eventually our game will be a game. Because what we're actually wanting to do is do a couple things. Teach us all, as we develop the game, about nature. What is it that the trees know that we don't? What is it that the ants know and the slime mold knows? And you know, what are the intelligence that play such an important part of Earth? And recently reading a book called Teeming, Teeming, about how nature has learned over the last billions of years. And they've nearly gone, part of nature's barely gone extinct. Some has gone extinct, but it's always the learning, always reaching, getting up to the edge, then finding a new way, or dying out. And that's where we are right now, in terms of, and it's like, in teaming, it's kind of, well, it's natural. Here we are. So the choice is ours, though, still, in terms of what we care to do with that thing. So, so what we really want to do is first online, is find out who's interested. And who has intent before they know, before they say, well, Gail, exactly what do you mean? We don't know. Yeah, we know we've got some principles. We know we have intent. We know we're finding people daily basis, reading books that fall into place, and things are coming into form. So that's what we know. We know that not very far down the pike, we're going to have a design shop, and that design shop's going to be for about 100 people. And those 100 people are going to be from the most diverse worlds that we can figure out how to. And so we have to put out scouts and root systems and tap into the intelligence in terms of who are our 100 people that should attend us, to create the first iteration of the game. From that, it will open up to more and more and more and more. But it intends to be a few simple rules, and we'll play it together. And we'll find out. We're not wanting to, as somebody said, destroy the existing system. We do believe we can't have a better world with the existing marketplace as it's designed. That we've reached the limits of that, and we've got to figure out new ways. We've studied the work of Bernard Lietaert, who wrote Worlds Without Money, and he helped EU design the euro dollar. But his passion is alternative currencies. So our work is to create an alternative path that over time has the opportunity for people to say, that makes sense, let's go that way. for more and more people to join. So we don't know exactly what that means, but we do think that it's time, and there are enough people, there are thousands of people, maybe millions of people who are waking up going, realizing it's the structure that's holding us back. It's not the creativity, it's not the wishes, it's not the hope, it's the structure in which we find ourselves or we see ourselves. And so what we intend to do is change that framework as we progress. And so the framework then creates alternative ways. And we want a real currency, but we see that currency as being recycling. This is what Bernard says, all healthy economies celebrate alternative currencies, because the alternative currency moves through the system, constantly moves through local and regional and global systems. Determining what you want it to determine, you know, in terms of, and this will be for restoring Earth, for rebuilding Earth as a work of art, for recreating path to a healthy economy, whatever that means. And we figure we can do this. And, you know, I was talking to Andy, and Andy's gonna have a parse of this. I was thinking about Andy talking about 2030 and the fear of 2030. Well, I had looked at 2030 as beautiful. He had looked at 2030 as potentially pretty scary, which, you know, do we have to make it either or? It's probably both. But the sooner we get started, the more we can shape that 2030 that is in your mind, and give it a run for its money, at least. And so I'm very excited about what the three of us, and it's interesting because Michael, his name's Michael Haupt, H-A-U-P-T. You can find 2030 Project and read more about it. It's changing shape as it's written, but it's still on the web. And Elizabeth, our Goldilocks time to talk, because Michael's from South Africa, Elizabeth's from Hawaii, I'm from California. So our Goldilocks time to talk is 2:30 in the afternoon, 11:30 for Michael, because he's waiting tables for, or he's the manager of a restaurant for his brother at night, so 11:30 is perfect for him. And Elizabeth gets up at 10:30, so 11:30 works for her. But that's about the only time. And actually, hour-long conversations, we have gotten so far because our conversations are so rich. And then we go explore, come back a few days later, share, and things are just really falling into place. So I feel like I'm really excited. I can't tell you a whole lot more, but I can tell you, if you want to play a part in this, be patient with us, but give us your name, and we'll, you know, it's probably going to be several months before we start saying, hey, we're here, next steps, kind of thing. But I'm sure it's going to happen. I just feel that 100% with gut level when you feel like this is going to work. And it's a big idea. What a lot of people are doing. So another reason we're looking at this is it's too bad the United Nations 17 goals even had to become about. It's too bad we weren't taking care of that along the way. But since we didn't, and now there are 17 goals, they can't mature without each other. They're not individual things. And unless we learn how to bring those things together and weave those different economies, environment, education together into a fabric that is systemic, holistic, and in the direction we want it to go. If we can't see that as we progress, then there is no hope. So that's the part of Tomorrow Makers, which is this weaving together. A lot of good products out there, a lot of good services, a lot of things that people have intention, but we believe they can't be realized in the present market economy. And we can change that without tearing it down, without running up against it. That would kill us off very fast if we tried to do that. So that's not our goal. Anyway, so that is the gist of what Tomorrow Makers is going to do. There's been a lot of conversation with us. Is it a game? Is it this? Is it that? We're looking at Jane McGonigal's. How many of you know Jane McGonigal's work? If you don't, you might text it. She's a gamer. And she's written a book about how millions are online every day, all day, gaming and learning and upping each other. Just because there's a game and gaming is good. But she's put out games to change the world. And just as many people join that and are looking at how do you solve this problem, how do you solve this problem, how do you solve this problem in a collaborative way. Nobody yet is looking at how to weave it all together that we can see. And if there are, yes, because it's not a competition, it's like, how do we build each other? And how do we build the platform and infrastructure and the container in which we can learn together what it means to create a life, a game of life, but in a serious way. The world we want, the world we wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and go, why can't the world be more like this? Why is it? You know, research. We learned when we were working with CAP that solved brain cancer within 5 years, or within 10 years, that almost 60% of our researchers' time goes toward getting grants. And once that grant is good, it's good for maybe 3 years, but it doesn't connect to anything. Because you could only ask for a very specific thing in your grant. And at the other end, so at the beginning and at the end, after people work very hard, they get these bits. And in the middle, they call that the valley of death. Because nothing connects that beginning research to the end research. That's how our protocols have been set up. That's how our system's been set up. We didn't intend that. Unintended consequences, but it's how it happened. But you know, when they brought technology people together, engineers together, entrepreneurs together, researchers together, surgeons together, survivors together, patients together, they just got a $100 million grant to do it right. And in that session, in that 2.5-day session, they realized how silly it was, that it wasn't being done right. And they realized it because they had outside forces. They had those entrepreneurs and they had those tech people who were looking at differently and seeing different things. And so the whole framework got reframed. So to think we can't do this, you know, to think that we don't have the energy or the empathy or the intelligence to do this, maybe if we let go of our human assumptions and get back into earth perceptions a little bit. This is our home. This is where we all live. This earth, the place we call home. You know, and what are we doing to it? What are we allowing for it? In 2005, I read an article, another article, which really caught my attention, called We the People, the Second Superpower. And I thought, aha, can we mature? My first thought, can we mature past that? We have the ability to mature, to work together, to get out of all the things we've been taught in school about competition and money and success and failure and all of these things. Can we mature past that? I think we are. I think we are. There's also, I mean, there's indications every day we're not, but there's a lot more indications that in fact we are, from my vantage. So that's my story. Questions? Comments? love your suggestions, not at the detail yet. And afterwards, if you wanna, there's a place on Tomorrow Makers where you can say interested to sign in. Resources, I mean, already somebody said, you know about the University of the Possible, you know about this, you know about this, you know about this. So those resources are really nice for us as well. But we're on a fast learning track. And we're not, this isn't like, oh, we've gotta get there first. It's like, who's in the field? Because what we're creating, Matt talked yesterday about fields of energy. We intend to create that with a meme, with a environment. The design shop will eventually do that. We have to raise money so that so we can really have the diversity we want and do the things we want to do. But we're creating a new field of energy, and we can do that as well online. We'll use Zoom as a beginning, if you know about Zoom. Zoom allows for breakout teams. Zoom allows for whiteboarding. Zoom allows for a lot of things. There are many, many things we can do online, like syntopical reading, if you know, some of you know syntopical reading, to learn about nature and what nature does and sharing that. And so there are a lot of things that even before we go, this is the game we're really gonna create. We know simple rules. We know things like Kevin Kelly's how do you create something out of nothing. You know, we know enough to receive information but not know where it fits, right? And not know exactly what your role can be. But interest, yes, love interest. And contacts. Okay. And Tom over there is doing all kinds of networking behind him. So in my mind, we've talked a lot, those in the network, about the value web. The value web of providers, producers, investors, clients, working together. In my mind, this can create a value web of enormous value, where we're creating this huge meshwork beyond process, beyond product, beyond, you know, just creating this new world, game, life. We use the, have you heard of finite and infinite games? You know that? Let's see if I can find that for you. We know, it may take me a minute. There are
James
other questions.
James Carse, so
Yeah.
C-A-R-S-E.
Yeah, I don't have very good internet here, so. Todd, maybe you can find it. Do you have your phone? I can't get on here. But anyway, he says, you know, there's finite games and there's infinite games. Here, I've got it. The rules of the finite game may not change. The rules of an infinite game must change. Finite players play within boundaries. Infinite players play with boundaries. One word difference, big difference. Finite players are serious. Infinite players are playful. Finite player plays to be powerful. An infinite player plays for strength, or with strength. A finite player consumes time. An infinite player generates time. A finite player aims for eternal life. The infinite player aims for eternal birth. The choice is yours. Isn't a really simple word, one word changes, but it shifts everything. And so what we're pulling from is all of this stuff and saying, let's make it so. Let's really make it so. And we think, and we'll have to learn, there'll be feedback every inch of the way. We have to learn. Otherwise, if we don't embed feedback right into the system, we'll have the same unintended consequences. We'll have some anyway, but we'll have a shit full of unintended consequences that will not help us go where we want to go. So, big questions like, how do you keep the bad guys out? How do you do this? How do you do this? Well, we don't exactly know, but we know we can. We know we can shape it. We know we can give it our best shot. But we can't do it without everybody joining the game at some point, because it's not ours to create, it's ours to create.
Okay. Have you seen the movie Ready Player One?
Say what?
Ready Player One. The movie. There's a movie Ready Player One, which is almost a simulation model of what you're describing.
Yeah.
So it would just be a fun thing. If you haven't watched the movie, watch the movie.
Yeah.
It is a sort of everyone gets immersed in an online game, and it's a struggle between excuse me, good and evil in the world, because evil is the sort of the marketing companies that want to own the game and advertise everywhere, and the good guys are the guys that are struggling in a playful way to find the keys to the kingdom. And they actually have to find 3 magic keys, which unlocks and gives them control of the game.
Yeah. So
And if any of you still read, you can also read the book.
Yep.
It's called Ready Player One.
Ready Player One.
Ready Player One.
Okay. So we've played a lot with, is it a either or? Are we turning one against the other? Or can we do it without that? And we don't know at this point in time. We don't know. But we think there are enough avenues that lead toward peace. That, it's not about solving things. It's about finding those underlying causes. When Matt and I started the process here, we started first with what doesn't work. What really doesn't work? I mean, simple things like, some of you are old enough to realize this, but most of you probably aren't. When we began, any meeting began with everyone taking at least 5 minutes to say who they were. And we weren't at all interested in that, because we didn't care who people were when they walked in the room. We cared who they were becoming. And so to name in the front of the room, my name is, and I'm in charge of, and I do this, gave everybody their little territory, which was useless in terms of the design process. And so we said, no, we're not going to do that. I mean, big arguments with the sponsors in terms of, yes, we always do that. No, we're not going to do that. Creating an environment, creating a place, creating that energy. People said no. Our board said, no, don't call it design. Designers only do interior decoration. Don't call it design. No, don't use the word paradigm. Paradigms, nobody will understand paradigm. You can't build a world on what other people tell you. It's not that that's useless, but you can't count it. And you need to really look at it and say, what does this do? So going back to first principles, what are the first principles that actually allow us to look at conditions, those conditions that we need to change in order to get the infrastructures that we want? In my world, infrastructure is education, as well as highways, and it's all those things that help us be healthy society, healthy culture. It's those things, that's what I call, that's what we can redesign. I know we can do that. And we can put them in place in our own world that we're creating, led by Slime Molding, to do this. So, and you all, another way you all can help is by just informing people, your clients, that this is going on, and they may want to, think about how they put this idea together. They may want to think about how they take a little bit of the waste out of the system. because there's this game going on that's, you know, attracting more and more people to a world that has their customers, you know, that is engaging with its customers. We see everybody playing as individuals. That does not mean that you have to shed yourself of your business, of being part of American Express or Intel, but you have to come as an individual and be a player as an individual. So, because when it comes down to it, what are organizations? What are they? They're just us. They're just us. They're not buildings, and they're not rules, they're people, and people have choices. You know, and now we have more choices than we had 5 years ago. And we probably have more choices than we'll have in the next 5 years. So it's a real nice window right now. I don't know how long the window's gonna be, 10 years, 15 years, 5 years. But there's a lot going on in the world that could crash as well as renew. And so our game is make hay slowly, but get on with it. Do it right. Go forward.
So I had
Speak up, yeah.
I had a moment a couple of years ago where I was reading a book called The Navy and the Nation, and written by the Chief of Navy here in Australia, and he was talking about the fact that Navy needs to build somewhere near $80 billion worth of ships in Australia to keep the sovereign waters guarded, etc., etc. And that at the moment, because of the decline in engineering and learning and engineering, people putting themselves into that field and being interested in that sort of thing, that probably most of that shipbuilding will need to go offshore, because we simply aren't educating people into that field or exciting people into that field anymore. And it was just at the time, it was just oh, that's interesting. I think Gail and I were talking on Friday night, and it was a whole series of other thoughts. Gail mentioned that I had seen this vision of 2030 that made me cautiously nervous. And it came from a range of different things, and one of them was, I have a son who's 18 years old, and he's on the autistic spectrum, and he's a great young man, but he can be challenging. He has, over the years, found a lot of his self-esteem comes from the gaming community. He gets online and, you know, at 14 years old, he was leading clans of 350 people from all over the world, some of them who were in their 50s and 60s, and at 14, he was like the war chief. And he was amazing, and what he was doing was amazing. What was happening to him when he got offline, that was less amazing. So he found it increasingly difficult to disassociate himself from what he got online and find that same thing in the real world, which makes you start to think about what's the real world. And I did a bit of research into online gaming because I kept thinking, how do I keep his feet in the real world and still let him have what he finds in the virtual world? And somewhere along the line, I came across a statistic that said somewhere between 2030 and 2035, virtual reality will exist at a form that is indistinguishable from real life. At which point, the question raised in my mind, if you could choose your own adventure and there was no recrimination, why the hell would you ever come back? And for Brady, looking at Brady, the thing was, I can see Brady just going, oh, give me that thing. That's terrific. I don't have to exercise. If I find a way to sustain my body, I don't even have to feed myself or clean up my own waste. You know, I just plug myself into this thing, Ready Player One, and I'm away. And then some other things sort of occurred that made me curious as well. I was at a presentation last year where some guys from the Garvan Institute, part of Victoria University down in Melbourne, called Genome One, did a presentation where they demonstrated that they can take a sliver of fingernail or a hair follicle and they can run a gene, the gene sequence through it, so they basically map the genome, and they can digitally render the facial features of that human being to 98% accuracy at any age. And they've even mapped the 2,000 elements of the gene sequence that are environmentally formed. So if you live in an arid climate as opposed to a humid climate, how would it change the facial features of you at 20 as opposed to 40? And I went, wow. And then they're talking about, they've now identified the factors in the human genome that dictate growth. They don't think they can reverse it, but they think at some stage they may be able to arrest it. What happens when we start playing God in terms of how long people can live, or being a completely disease-free society, which sounds really, really cool. But every coin has two sides, so it just got me thinking about all of these different things that everybody talks about with great excitement. You know, technology is going to change the world. It will. But to what intent? And so, talking to Gail the other night, I was like, I'm really fascinated by tomorrow makers and what could happen, because I feel like at the moment the world is full of these great organisations rushing towards something, and that if that something is not coordinated with the right positive intent by the people who will inherit it, it could crash and some pretty spooky stuff could happen. So that was really, discuss.
And so it's, I think with Andy or with any, it's not to argue, because we don't have time to argue. We have time to get busy and create a different pathway, and that's what we really want to do. The other things will find their home, find their way, or die out. I mean, this is a fertile time of a new paradigm. Thousands of seeds are going to be planted, like in any tree. A few will land, some will lie in the soil for 10 and 15, 20 years, and suddenly pop up and come alive. So what we want to do is seed a lot of really, really rich ideas and get people working together and saying, oh, right, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. In a coordinated way, because they're already, I mean, I'm not saying there aren't already wonderful ideas out there. There are tons of ideas. I can't do my Sunday reading without getting really excited about this, and this, and this, and this, But they're still separate. They're still not finding their way together. There's no container. There's no way to begin weaving it together. And of course, we won't weave all of them together, but we want to weave enough together to actually create that fabric that shows a better way. And currency, we want to include currency, we want to include the things that matter to all of us, the ability to make a difference, to work together, to have the things we enjoy. We're not talking about going into poverty, but we're thinking there's a whole different way of redirecting and reframing how we spend and what we value. And from 2000, Matt and I met in 2000, in 1976, or 75 or something. And we both, set out to say, what is it we can do? This was one idea that we could do. We could bring people together. You may not know it today, but collaboration was a very dirty word. It was a foreign word. In many ways, in the World War II, it was, terrible in terms of spy and telling. So collaboration, co-design, collective intelligence, group genius, these things were almost unheard of. The first time we asked somebody to write on a wall, backcasting, solving a problem, all the hands always went back like this, writing on the wall or like this, and people would start crying. Men, grown men, start crying. It's like, nobody's ever asked me. Nobody's ever wanted to know how I would solve a problem or what I would want to do. And what we've found over the years, all of you in collective intelligence know that there's this dormant potential that has not been called upon. We want to find a way to call it. And I'm sure some people it'll be interesting to see what our 2030 world is. Whether it'll be global, it'll be regional, it will be better. I'm betting on us. I'm betting on us. That doesn't say everything else is going to be walked away. Because now I think the meme is anything goes. Capitalist market goes. But there are a huge number of us that go, that's not it. So it's going to be the same way, only in the opposite. It's be a small percentage. And, you know, Joy Ito, do you know the name Joy Ito? He runs Media Lab. I think he was one of the founders of AutoTech.
Joiito.
Yeah. 2 names. I think he was one of the founders of AutoTech. But now he runs Media Lab. And he said that what was really interesting about the games is that people would be playing the games, and then they had a bar. They had a place where you could meet online for a beer. And the conversations would be about the game, but they would discover that one of them was a racist and the other was a social activist. But they had found commonality in this game, and therefore they continued being friends, you know, and continued doing things. So it's interesting how you create a context and a field so that people can come together and discover things that they never would have thought they had anything to do with the other. So lots to think about, and I hope that I will get your interest and that you'll be patient with us, because I'm sure it'll come in waves. You know, right now, getting to this point where I can talk about it, I'm very excited. It'll be another couple months probably before another more big chunks fall into place. But if you're there, it's great. Comments, other things, wanna? Nick?
Can I add something, Gav?
Yeah.
Just
Come up here though, so people can hear you.
In the spirit of Sunday morning reading, there's another book worth looking at. There's something you may have come across. It's called God's Game. It was published many years ago by John Beck. And what he did was he did the research into the lost generation. Okay, so people talk a lot about millennials and baby boomers, but what happened between baby boomers and millennials?
Yeah.
They never really had a definition. And his research showed that they were the people that grew up in the MTV, the video game generation, immersed in all of those things. So their thought processes were much, 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 much faster. They were used to multiple sort of dimensions. And you can argue, or you could explore whether we saw the first iteration, the first wave of these people growing up was the internet boom bust, right? The internet companies .com bust back in the sort of 2000s, because these people would build companies and destroy companies with zero consequence. It's like having a reset button on the game, right? When you play a video game, you drive your car, you crash your car, you walk away, you start the track again. So it's the sort of the zero consequences of it. But it's that generation of people that came through with that sort of almost zero consequence. The other interesting thing about what you said around the way that kind of the relationship between a boss and that, who plays video games? What happens at the end of a level?
You fight the boss.
You fight the boss. Okay, so in a traditional corporate marketplace, you've got a boss. And your boss is seen by a generation of people as someone who's slowing down their progress. They're in their way. They're stopping them doing the things they need to do. So if you want to be a leader in today's world, you have to become someone's strategy guide. Because when you get stuck in a video game, what you do is you go and buy the video game book, which tells you if you go that way, swamps of doom, but if you go that way and hit someone on the head 3 times, you're going to be fine. So it's about how do you shift from being that boss that's in the way, that's controlling everything and stopping people's progress, to becoming the strategy guide.
Yeah.
And if you can become the strategy guide, then you can write the book of the web. That is, if you look at this through 17 different lenses, how you can get to it. Fascinating read. Explains a lot of the behaviours and really ties into the things that you're looking at and
Yeah.
researching now.
Yeah, and I think, I think the really young people, I have so much hope, because I don't think they're gonna, there is that point where you're idealist and then you become a non-idealist. And I think the young people aren't looking at being idealists, I think they're looking at being realists. And they're changing how we value things. I just held up this bracelet, because this was, it's from 4Ocean, and young people going surfing, lots of trash. They said to the fishermen nearby, "Why don't you clean this up?" And they went, "What, us? We're fishermen. We don't clean things up, we fish." And so the young people said, "Well then, we'll do it." And so this represents, I think I said a ton, it represents a pound of, this is all recycled, and it represents a pound, $20 a pound of trash. And they are going all over the world figuring out ways to clean up. Now, this is one of thousands and thousands of young people doing this today. They're not waiting for that moment to enter the marketplace grown up and more corporate. They're starting now, 9-year-olds. The 13-year-old that found a better way to do carpet. The 17-year-old from Netherlands that said, we can clean up the plastic in the ocean in 5 years. We can get half of it cleaned up in 5 years. It's out now working. It's a company that people have invested in. And they figured out how to do it with the ocean waves and how to get it recycled. So the 9-year-old child that says, wakes up one morning and says, "Why don't we do it this way?" So that window is opening so fast, and the game's changing. The interview on 60 Minutes of the Parkland students, did anyone see that? It was like, okay, adults, you can work with us. You cannot tell us. And you cannot put ifs in your sentence. So we need you, we want you, but not if you say, "I will do this if you do this." We don't want that. We don't want that. And they are finding each other all over the world and saying, "This is what we're going to do." Now, it may be small right now, but it's powerful. It's really powerful. So watch for it, because it's happening all over the world, and schools are now promoting it. Promoting some of the project-based learning can be really, really strong with that. Kids all the time going, what if? 90%. Still, I think it's a very high percentage of inventions come from strangers walking into a new situation and saying, "Why do you do that?" And that's where most of our products come from today. So kids are now doing that. They're not saying we have to be grown up before we can ask a question or get an answer. We can do it today. So there's lots of energy that says there's new weavings happening. There's new tapestries being created that we can tap into. I think one of my advantages is a long-range vision, because then it allows me every day to kind of curate, what do I hear that kind of fits in with that vision? What do I see that kind of fits in with that vision? So it's not about immediately getting my way, it's about that long-range vision that helps me see, and I see lots of trends today that weren't there in the 60s, which was another fabulous time of invention and design. Wonderful cycle, which we're now here again. Don't miss it. Join with us. Come. So, you can do it. That's all I want to say, unless you have questions.
I've got just probably one thing, just a little story, and I'll beg the forgiveness of those in the room who've heard it before, but
Keep your voice loud.
I will. I have a father-in-law. My father-in-law's name's Pete. He was a fighter combat instructor in the Royal Australian Air Force, and physicians in Vietnam and all the rest of it. And brought his fighter home, shot full of holes and wounded and whatnot. And when he got out of the Air Force, he continued to fly, but he flew helicopters instead of fighters. One time he was flying a helicopter up a gully in a bushfire, trying to get to the top, just the spot where the fire was going. And about 100 feet above the ground, the rotors of his helicopter had a high tension wire that was strung across the gully that he failed to see marked on the map and sheared off. And for those of you who've been in a helicopter and understand the perfect view that you had out of the canopy, the cockpit canopy, that was at the ground coming up at so many feet per second, and he said as he went into the deck he was certain he was going to die, and then there was this massive crash, and he said the world went black, and that was it. He thought he was out, and at some point he was aware again of all this noise around him, this banging and crashing, and stuff started to settle, and he realised he was still alive, and it had fallen on a hill and it had nosed in and settled back, the helicopter, but there's rubble strewn everywhere. And so all of a sudden he found himself sitting upright in this wrecked frame of a helicopter, going, I'm alive. And he thought, I've got to get out, and he's pushing all this scrap metal off himself and trying to get up, and he noticed pain in his right foot. He looked down and it was hanging off his leg by a bit of sinew. And he collapsed back into his seat, and my foot. And then he noticed something else, that it was some warmth on his back and his backside, and the only other thing that had really survived the crash attack was the fuel tank that was just starting to heat up. And he realised he had a really hard decision on his hands. He might have got to get out of this helicopter or burn, and somehow he managed to do that, and he sort of hauled across to a drainage ditch and got in before the thing blew up. And I've seen photographs of the aftermath of this thing, and it's just burnt wreckage, strewn over 100 metres of hillside. How anyone survived it defies logic. When he was telling me the story, we were driving in New Zealand across the South Island. We were going from Mount Cook down to Queenstown, and he tells the story far better than I do. But he was, in talking, I just said to him, I said, mate, what came out of that whole thing for you in the end? What if anything, did you sort of glean from that whole experience? And he said, Andy, I've got 3 things out of it. He said, the first thing, he said, when I was going into the deck and I knew I was going to die, he said, people who tell you your life flashes before your eyes, they're quite accurate, they're quite true. He said, so many things flew through my head, but he said largely what flew through my head were regrets. They were regrets that I hadn't been a good enough father to my daughters, that I hadn't been a good enough husband to my wife, and I hadn't been a good enough mate to my friends. And he said all of these things I wished I could have done better, that I had, if I had the chance to go back and take responsibility for those things, I would do it. And then, So he said that was the first thing I learned. He said the first thing I learned was relationships, friendships, and the love you put into them are the most critically important thing in life. And he vowed to himself afterwards that he would do everything he could to have great relationships that he took responsibility for the rest of his life. And in my knowledge of him, he's done that. He said the second thing he learned was it sucks to be a victim. He said when the rotors come off your helicopter and you're heading into the deck, he said it was only afterwards I realised that I hadn't seen this bloody thing on the map, but he said, I'm a victim. There's nothing I can do. I'm going and I'm going to die. And what he got out of that and finished was he would not willingly ever again be a victim to something he could or should have had an influence over. And again, largely my knowledge of him, he's done that too. So his awareness and his willingness to confront things has pushed out amazingly. And he said the third thing that he learned was that sometimes it pays to light a fire under your bum, because only then do you find out what you're truly capable of. And I share the story from the purpose of intent, as to, of intent. Why us? Why would people in this room want to take on the world? Because if not us, who? You know, if not, do we unwillingly become or unwittingly become victim to something we could or should have an influence over? So I leave that with you as a thought.
Yeah, you know, Nora Bateson, how many of you know read Nora's work? Small Arcs of Larger Circles. Nora is the daughter of Gregory Bateson, who I probably learned more about systems from than anybody else. So when Nora came along as the younger daughter, it was very exciting to spend time with her. But her book, Small Arcs of Larger Circles, Nora is creating a new language. She says it's all about relationships. She calls it symathesy, symathesy, which is with life, with each other. And that it's all about symathesis. It's all about the relationships. Not Lucas here as Lucas as a happening person or an employee, but Lucas is a person. Lucas says all we can glean about Lucas in the context. That's what we need to be understanding today. Not that Helena works for so-and-so or this, but what's the story? And warm data is another concept. She says, the data that's coming out today tells us nothing about life, nothing about living systems. It tells us that 44% are victims and 23% are homeless, and you know, but what's the story? What's the warm data around all of these happenings, these individual circumstances that create life, that create relationships, that create a way we see each other, frame each other, to come to know each other. And it's so important that we change the language today. We don't want to be targeted. We don't want to be branded. We don't want to be put in, oh, she's a, oh, he's a, you know, kind of thing. We're looking at what does it mean to be human today? What is humanity? How do we create a world in which we are serving Earth as Earth serves us? What is that relationship, that full cycle relationship? And so this language will be embedded into the story. That, you know, we've got every barrier, we've got so many barriers keeping us from that thinking today. In terms of holistic thinking and thinking, how do we actually do this? So together, we can do it. We can come to see things differently. So look for those books, look for those articles, look for those signals for the new patterns, because they're definitely emerging. And with those patterns, we hope to collect and shape and involve and engage. And knowing that somebody, sapiential leadership, somewhere along the path, somebody will stand and say, hey, I got the game. I know what this core needs to be. Somebody else will stand up and say, hey, I've got this. Sapiential leadership, liminal leadership, leading in ambiguity, but stepping up to the pieces that we have to play. That's the game we want to create, is that wonderful feeling of stepping up to make a difference. Without yourself. Sunday morning. more thing, and a couple books to read. Brilliant Green. Do you know that trees, we talk about our 6 or 7 or 8 senses. Trees have 15, 20 senses. The intelligence of trees is phenomenal, phenomenal. You know, the slime moles, what they can do, I mean, the fact that they're a scholar. Rivers are being selected to sit on boards of directors. You know, people are going, oh, we need more, we need help. Who can we call on? Well, we can call on what's right in front of our eyes, what is very present. Look out there. So, and thank you guys, this is fabulous. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.